we're going to start out by just pre-hardening this piece that we cut out earlier. Just because when we round it, it tends to delaminate quite a bit, and it just makes the whole thing easier if it stays as one piece. So just hook a small clothespin to the flat side where we're gonna do the actual fold. So right beside the dotted line, red line, and grip it by there with a clothespin, and then cover all these other angles with some 2-to-1 glue. You don't have to use a lot, you're just trying to bond the various layers of cardboard to each other, and especially along there on the other end is the most vulnerable spot where it generally tends to delaminate. So just set that aside and let that dry while we carve the gun, and it should be ready by the time we're ready. So, I need that eventually. So you got the template gun thing. You don't actually have to glue this down or even cut it out. You want to select your bamboo skewer that you're going to use to make the gun fairly carefully. You want nice straight grain and not a warped skewer at all, so a fairly flat section, at least as long as the exposed gun parts here. This blue symbol actually represents this, so that is covered. So you don't need very much, but you should try to select a nice straight grained piece and just set it in front of the symbols from the template, and you want to mark everywhere there's a change in size. So the tip of the gun, and right before where that paper part is, and I'm just going to mark as well how far the paper part comes to, so we can use that as a guide later. So you want to extend these 2 marks that we made around the circumference of the skewer, but extend them using your official marks until you can connect them. So lengthen the official marks from each side so you don't, because you will end up all over the place generally. If you just try to go from one side to all the way around, you'll end up, oh, I'm not meeting up my lines anymore. So you want to score these using your scraper blade, and score them fairly deep along those 2 pencil marks we just made. A little bit deeper toward the end, then toward the base of the gun here. And now we're going to use our X-Acto knife, and we're just going to carve very gently, and be very, very gentle when you get to the end here, because it's easy to like flake this part off. And while it's not a big deal if you do that right at first, you're going to start getting towards the size this needs to be fairly quickly, and you don't want to cut that off, because you need it to be larger than the main portion of the barrel here. So you probably can't see that I'm doing this, but I am spinning the gun after each stroke of the knife here. Just trying to take an even amount off all sides. And about 90% of the time, you're going to want to move your gun from the base toward the end of the barrel. And then once you start getting towards the size you want, you just back cut this part. One thing you do want to be aware of, though, is if you get right up to where you want the size you want to be, you can't really back cut anymore, because you'll get under the grain and lift up a whole lot of material. So just keep it sort of current, go back every once in a while, back cut that, and then obviously you're going to want to take the most off where the taper is the strongest, so you might want to spend a little bit of time just up towards the tip with your knife, and then just try to you don't have to get it perfectly round, so you're not looking to try to get it perfect, but you do want to get it even, and a good way to do that is to observe how much of a lip there is toward this part here. Should be even almost all the way around. Like I can see that there's quite a bit more lip here than there is there, so I need to carve on this side more than the other. So I'm still spinning it, but I'm going to spin it back and forth toward the side I need to cut, and turn away from the side where it's pretty much enough is cut off there. And I'm just going to, it doesn't appear that I scored it quite hard enough, which isn't bad. You can always take off those little bits of wood later. Okay, so now we're going to check it against, we're getting towards the size we want. We're not quite there yet. This is about right. This needs to come down a bit more. Now that is, the template thing is only a general guide. I mean, even between models that you buy in the store, the size of the gun is extremely varied. So I wouldn't try to use that as, try to make the gun look good and be approximately the right size. And if you can see that the models, there's not a whole lot of there's a whole lot of variation in how the gun looks. So you're just adding to the variation, essentially. Okay, so once you start getting towards where you want to be, grab a little piece. You may even have to cut off of a little piece of sandpaper, and you kind of make a pocket out of the sandpaper, and then just spin the gun under it, and that serves to round it. If you see anywhere that needs to definitely come down a bit, then you can go like this. The barrel is so short, though, that you can barely even get any sanding done that way. So I would mostly go with just spinning it under the sandpaper, and this would serve to round it a bit better. Another way you can kind of round it is by putting your blade at a 90-degree angle. You can take very, very small amounts off. It's kind of like sanding it as well, but that's a very slow process. And now we're going to want to take this down, and the best way to do it is kind of start about a quarter of the way in and just nip this front down. You're tapering it, but it's not supposed to be tapered. So once we get it towards the size we want, we'll back cut it to even. It's just too dangerous to try to stick your blade right up on there, because you'll end up flaking the whole side off. And essentially you have to start the gun again if that happens. So not looking for that to happen. And again, you're not trying to get this perfectly round. You can repair it a bit with sandpaper if it's off. And it's not horribly noticeable if there's a little bit of variation. Okay, now let's just check it from the front. If it looks pretty round, I'll be happy enough. And then just very, very gently take your sandpaper and spin it against that surface. You should be able to get any ridges or anything like that to disappear. And now as a final touch, sand the front of the gun so it's very flat. And take your 1/16 bit and you're just going to drill out a little bit. Try to be really centered if you can get it centered. And just make a bit of a concave area where you're going to throw some black paint. And it looks really cool when it's painted. So you should be able to create a... It doesn't have to be deep. Just a little concave pocket there at the end. And so when we cut this off, you see this mark we made that shows where that paper comes to. We want to give it about this much space again on the other side. And then either just keep rolling it until it breaks off, or use a pair of needle nose pliers to grip it right by there, because if you try to use your fingers, sometimes it'll snap here instead of here. And that is no fun. So just to avoid that, and we'll also want to just sharpen this a little bit so it's easy to fit it into where it needs to go. Okay, so the gun is ready. Now we're going to install